So I want to try and build a case today that Jesus was actually transfigured at Mount Hermon. And to remind you, if you weren't with us last week, Jesus was just with his disciples at Caesarea Philippi, and he asked them a big question. It was about the kingdom of God, how the kingdom of God manifests itself. He said, "Who do men say I am?" And they say, "Christ of God." And he then gives them 8 days to climb that mountain. Now remember, back in Caesarea Philippi, there were temples set up to the other gods who demanded sacrifices, like Hades and Pan. They demanded that the worshipers sacrifice to them. Jesus begins to describe a God and a kingdom that's not about other people sacrificing for him as much as God comes to earth to sacrifice for them. He then says to them, "So deny yourself, take up your cross daily and follow me." He then takes them up over this hill, just on the other side of the hill, way up 9,000 feet to the top of Mount Tabor to show them what the kingdom of God is like. And that's where we find ourselves in Luke tonight. Imagine with me that your grandfather pulls you aside and he says, "I've got a family heirloom I'd like to give you. This family heirloom was given to me by my grandfather, and it was given to him by his grandfather. This is incredibly valuable. It is incredibly precious, almost unfathomable how much it's worth. And of all the grandchildren, I have decided to give it to you." And you're like, "Man, thanks, Grandpa." Then you're like, "Valuable? Unfathomable worth? Antiques are antiques." So you say thanks nicely to Grandpa, and then you go home and set it on the shelf. And there it sits for weeks, months, years. A couple years later, your grandpa is passing away, and he's lying in the bed at hospice. It's a very tearful moment. You wonder if you have hours, maybe a few days left. You go down to give Grandpa a hug, and you're crying with him and just having a moment with Grandpa. And he leans over, doesn't have a lot of voice left, and he whispers in your ear, "You won't know how valuable it is unless you break it." And you head home that evening. I wonder if he's talking about that valuable heirloom they gave me years ago. So you go and you pick this thing up, and you're like, "You won't know how valuable it is unless you break it." Should I or shouldn't I? And you drop it. It shatters all over the floor. And it reveals, sure enough, a crown from a dynasty of something you've never seen before. In fact, you pick up this crown, and it is beautiful. It's recognizable but foreign at the same time. It has beautiful 5 jewels in it, which have colors like a Technicolor Dreamcoat you may have seen before, but yellows and blues and reds. And as you're holding it, it begins to glow. Not like glow stick glow or lightning bug glow, like piercing light, lasers into my eyes kind of glow. And you recognize whatever this kingdom is, whatever this breaking has revealed, it is unfathomable. You almost can't even look at it. It's so bright, like lasers piercing out in all directions. You realize this has come from a whole new place in a whole new world. And then it strikes you. It's been sitting on your shelf for years. You have been in possession and in the presence of unfathomable value, but you didn't see it or know it until it was broken. Jesus, before taking his disciples to Mount Hermon, says something very interesting. He says, "I'm going to tell you truly that there are some of you standing here," disciples. Not all, by the way, just some. There are some of you standing here who are not going to taste death until you see what the kingdom of God is like. And there are several Greek words for see, some of which means to the opposite of being blind. He doesn't use that word. To look attentively to see, it's not that word. To watch as a spectator, He uses the word in Greek eido, which means to come to know or understand. There's some of you here that are going to come and have a full appreciation for the possession and the reality of the kingdom before you die. And I think Luke includes this here because what happens on Mount Hermon is a fulfillment of exactly this. Jesus is going to allow himself to be broken. Now, he just said, the way my kingdom spreads is the Messiah needs to suffer, die, and you too, deny yourself, be broken, take up your cross, be broken daily, and that's what will release the kingdom. He then takes them on a journey, and I want to take you on that journey to 3 mountains. They're really 3 parts of the same mountain. We're going to go to Journey Mountain, then we're going to go to Snow Mountain, and we're going to end on Tabernacle Mountain. And trying to experience who God is and what this kingdom is all about. The first mountain is Process Mountain because they leave Caesarea Philippi, and they're thinking about brokenness. I mean, how would you value brokenness if brokenness revealed to you that you were in the possession and presence of unfathomable value? You might start saying brokenness, some good things come from brokenness. Some good things came into my life because of brokenness. I might value brokenness differently if it revealed things I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So he takes them to Journey Mountain. Here on Journey Mountain, just up the mountain from Caesarea Philippi, Jesus often, after saying some radical statement or something really stunning, would say, guys, let's go for a hike. And for 8 days, they're crunch the way up the mountain. Thinking about that, the Messiah must die. It says for 8 days as they're crunching their way around the mountain, they're thinking about these sayings. He's the Christ, but he doesn't want us to tell people. Because he said the Christ must suffer and die and be raised again. And if anyone wants to follow after him, so I want to follow after him, I need to deny myself. What does it look like to deny myself? Do I currently deny myself? And I need to take up my cross. 8 days. What is my cross? What does it mean to take up a cross? Am I doing it daily? And for 8 days, Peter, James, and John, 3 people, went up to the mountain to pray. And they're wrestling with this idea. Does brokenness, the brokenness of the Messiah, us being broken by denying ourselves and taking up our cross, is that really what reveals the unfathomable value of the kingdom of God? If so, do I embrace brokenness or resist it? So what were these sayings? Well, again, it was what I mentioned and a little bit more. Denying yourself, taking up your cross daily, following me. And then Jesus said, right before they headed up, they're processing this, whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Oh, and whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. This upside down kingdom that seems so recognizable and valuable and yet otherworldly, and I've never seen anything like this before. And that's what they're processing. That's what they're thinking about. So take a journey with me up Process Mountain. Just think about your own heart and your own life. How much do you value apologizing? Swallowing your pride. Admitting you're wrong. Sacrificing. Do you really value sacrifice? Yeah, sacrifice. That's where it's at. Being generous and kind. Allowing God to humble you, or better yet, you humble yourself to be teachable and open. See, Jesus says that's the whole kingdom. And until you allow yourself to be open and broken and admit, you're not going to let the kingdom out. We had a small group a couple weeks ago. Got together a bunch of 20-somethings to go to the church. They thought there was only like 3 of them who attended, so we got about 15 to 20 of them who are getting together. And we're just talking about how to love better, how to comfort one another, how to love one another, all the one another's in the Bible. And as we were talking, one of the people in the group said, one of the things that was a challenge for me is that I had a parent who was an addict. And that parent pretty much kept choosing the addiction over me. But God used that to bring me into an adoption process or some other parents, and I really have no connection with my birth parents. And we're talking about how to process with people, how to grieve with people. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a follow-up question in front of everybody? And they said, no, it's fine. I said, would you say you're experiencing grief over what your birth parents haven't done? Or anger? Or betrayal? She said, well, it's not grief. She said, because, God's worked it out for the good. And we were talking about this love style called being an avoider. I said, well, the thing about avoiders have a tendency not to like grief. And they sort of like, well, it's all good now. Is it possible that your avoiding tendencies are keeping you from grieving? I said, well, I never thought of it, to be honest, but maybe. I said, what emotion does come to mind? This person says, revenge. And often it's easier to identify anger, but right under anger is hurt. As we talked as a group, we were just talking about the brokenness of being honest with somebody else. Even yourself. Most of us don't want to be honest with our own brokenness of dealing with grief or dealing with anger. I was struggling with anger this last 24 hours over something that happened to me yesterday. I was processing it with my future son-in-law, Brandon. It wasn't about him, but just like, hey, I'm really angry about something. Help me bounce this off you. Just had a great conversation, being broken and open about dealing with the stuff of life. So give yourself time to process, to really think about what does sacrifice look like? What is denying yourself, giving up your rights, not having to be right all the time, not having to prove yourself all the time, giving somebody grace or the benefit of the doubt. That's what happens during those 8 days on Process Mountain. Then they come to Snow Mountain. And why do I call it Snow Mountain? Well, I think you'll see. Because Mount Hermon has snow on the top of it during winter season. So much so that there's actually a ski resort today you can go to. If you want to go ski, you can ski on the mountain that I believe Jesus was transfigured on, which is kind of cool, right? And so up here on Ski Mountain is on the top of Mount Hermon is the place I think Jesus was with Peter, James, and John. Now, if you're not a skier, you may not recognize this, but you'll probably have something like it. If you go to a place to go skiing, often you go down this locker room. And when you're in the locker room, you're putting on your boots. And it's a little dimly lit. At least certainly compared to the sun outside. And you get your boots on, you get your coat on, you get your gloves on, and you're ready to go. You grab your skis, you grab your ski poles. As you're heading out of this sort of dimly lit locker room, you open the doors, and as you do, light from the sun is piercing into your eyes.